Story 1. China will not back down. Trump has too big an ego to do so, but it will really start to hurt the billionaire's wallet, so Trump will back down first with some excuse. Story 2. China has stopped buying American grain. The former president is advocating for government support for American farmers. American farmers continue to express concerns about government assistance to immigrants and criticize welfare recipients while voting for representatives who undermine agricultural exports. Story 3. Probably every member of Congress who holds a town hall receives significant feedback about this, and we find out if the two-thirds majority is needed to override Trump's veto and strip him of his tariff powers materializes. We are in World War II rationing territory without the precipitating event of a Pearl Harbor attack to rally people behind the need for it. Story 4. China can manage this much better than the United States can, especially since China is only engaged in a trade war with one country, while the United States is, for some reason, in a trade war with all of the countries simultaneously. This might be the most foolish decision anyone has ever made. Story 5. The United States is facing retaliatory tariffs and levies from multiple directions, including China, the European Union, and Canada, with more likely to follow. Additionally, the United States did not implement a strategic approach to their tariffs, which will also lead to significant self-inflicted economic harm. It is going to be challenging for them. Story 6. I believe Trump has misunderstood how far China is willing to go. The Chinese population can endure hardships much more than the American population, which places things in their favor. Story 7. Trump's ego will harm the United States. Meanwhile, the rest of the world will create a trade pact, leaving the United States on the outside looking in. Story 8. Prices increase. Tariffs will eventually be removed, likely under a different administration, but prices will not decrease. Everyone loses. Story 9. Economic depression. The Federal Reserve will likely lower interest rates soon in a misguided move that will only increase inflation. It is over. We lost. Story 10. I think the predictions that China will yield to Trump have lost all credibility. There is actually an upside to all of this, as Rand Paul said. When Smoot and Hawley imposed their tariffs in the 1930s, we lost control of the House and Senate for 60 years. Story 11. What happens next is Trump doing something even more foolish. In a few months, the Republican Party turns on him even more. If we are lucky, there will be another impeachment that actually goes through in 3.5 years. Story 12. China takes over as the reserve currency of the world. The United States falls off an economic cliff and turns into Russia 2.0. Story 13. Trump does not care about you, the country, or anything other than himself. One morning he will smell one of his unpleasant odors, think it's a sign, and make changes, likely for the worse. Story 14. This situation will negatively impact the United States as much as it does China. The difference is that China still has a significant portion of the world purchasing products from them, while the United States is erecting barriers and alienating other countries, except perhaps Russia. Overall, I believe Trump will be the one to back down in this case. Story 15. I am from Atlantic City, even prior to Trump's path of destruction and multiple bankruptcies. It is always the same playbook. Give him 10 options on a problem or project, and he will choose the worst one every time. When it blows up in his face, he blames everyone else. Then he will double down, creating an even bigger mess. Finally, no matter how significant the disaster he has created, he declares victory and moves on to destroy the next thing. We are currently in the double down phase. Why was Benjamin Netanyahu lurking around the White House the other day? Is he planning to bomb Iran? One thing you can always count on Trump for: things can always get worse with him. He is an absolute legend at messing everything up. The pressure on him has been intense, leading to the capitulation and declaration of victory phase, along with the ability to extort more with a new deadline. Story 16. The United States financial markets will crumble. Over the next 3 weeks, goods arriving from China that left without tariffs will either be paid for or destroyed. Small and medium businesses will close and lay off employees. Once the 3 weeks are over, shipping from China will cease, and layoffs and business failures will continue. United States bond yields will spike, leading to a debt crisis as inflation and interest rates rise dramatically. About a year from now, the United States will make a massive 50% cut to its defense budget, which it can no longer afford, and withdraw from bases around the world, grounding half of its fleet. The American empire will end. Story 17. Everything is going to become more expensive. The former president does not care, and the rest of Congress is either unwilling or unable to stop it, relying only on strongly worded letters and speeches that will be completely ignored. He will never willingly admit defeat. He would rather go down with the ship. So everyone should grab a bucket and start bailing. Story 18. The issue is that everything China imports from the United States can be obtained elsewhere. Republican tariffs in 2018 on China led them to start purchasing soybeans from neighboring countries instead of the United States, resulting in $26 billion in agricultural export losses for the United States. Additionally, the $23 billion bailout for mostly corporate-owned soybean farms and the 10% tariff on China cost the United States at least $49 billion. Story 19. I was under the impression tariffs were an extra tax on imported goods to encourage domestic production and purchases. The United States doesn't produce much. What could it possibly export to China that would have any impact there compared to the vast majority of goods coming from China? Story 20. Americans should travel to China. Visit major cities like Chengdu or Shanghai. Observe how clean it is with no graffiti. The metro system operates beyond imagination, and the airports are modern and efficient. Customer service is excellent, and transportation is rarely delayed. The people are kind, and the country is advancing rapidly. In comparison, the United States seems stuck in the past, while China is investing in infrastructure like high-speed trains. If you believe the United States is the greatest nation on earth, you are mistaken. Story 21. Trump is mistaken to think China will automatically back off once he rescinds his tariffs against them. If I were China, I would be frustrated and keep the 84% retaliatory tariff in place for 6 months to send a message. Story 22. I believe that eventually, Trump will back down on the tariffs and then claim he won some negotiations that never occurred. Once the stock market recovers to about halfway back to normal, he will declare victory. He may say, "That was my plan all along," or "Look how good I am for the economy." It will be some form of smoke and mirrors to win people back to his side. Story 23. The American farmers who voted for Trump will soon find themselves overwhelmed by soybeans and debt. Story 24. Trump's plan to weaken and isolate America is working effectively. This will leave the door wide open for China to take a leadership role. United States currency dominance will diminish. Democracy is already being undermined, so the next election may not even occur. Putin made a strategic choice in selecting an insider to weaken America from within. Story 25. The poorer you are, the more difficult your situation becomes. There will be very few winners, but billions of individuals facing challenges. That is the underlying plan. Story 26. This whole situation is a mess. As a Canadian who lives near the United States border, my friends and I often drive to the United States for weekend fun or vacations. None of us plan to return to the United States, even if all tariffs are removed immediately. I would be surprised if my friend group is the only one that feels this way. I feel really bad for United States citizens. Their economy is facing a significant downturn, and they are about to experience a dramatic loss of tourism revenue. Why would any Europeans choose to visit the United States after this? Story 27. China has no reason to back down. They depend on United States trade much less than Americans think. We account for only 11% of their trade. Right now, the international market is flooded with people looking to move away from America for alternative trade partners. China will have no trouble making up that 11% with other nations. Keep in mind that the United States is starting a trade war with everyone right now. If we were focusing on China, we would have much more leverage, as we could threaten our other trading partners if they did not join us against China. Former President Trump and his political allies are stuck in a 1970s and 1980s mentality. They see China as a backwards, barely industrialized communist country. However, China has progressed to be as developed as other first-world nations. Their economy is no longer very communist. It resembles a form of state-centered authoritarian capitalism. Additionally, they do not need to worry about elections. Their citizens can endure a decline in their quality of life, and the government will simply ignore it. They can push their populace quite far without any consequences. In contrast, in America, we are already starting to see some political figures become very concerned about what these policies will mean for the upcoming elections. Story 28. Total trade will decline. Our economy will suffer. Other countries will turn to China as their primary trade partner. We will cede our position as the global superpower to China. Story 29. What really worries me is how this affects Taiwan. Not disrupting U.S. trade is a significant factor holding them back from military action. With that gone, I believe they may use this as an opportune time to strike. Story 30. Trump is using the economic damage from tariffs as leverage with Congress over his new tax proposal. He expects an economic crisis that can only be averted by tax cuts for corporations and billionaires. I expect Congress will yield and propose an extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The tariffs will be dropped and the market will respond favorably. Wealth inequality will increase, and consumer protection and social welfare will deteriorate. Story 31. The only thing I know is that things are going to get worse before they get better. Americans have no claim to the phrase, "Don't tread on me." The French would have shut the country down. Koreans would have gotten a new president by now. Americans fully support this or are too lazy and selfish, myself included, to do anything about it. Story 32. 3 scenarios. 1. They both pull back before serious damage is done. They go a few months to a few years and then pull back with only some damage done. A new world trade order establishes itself with the United States being mostly locked out. Even a new administration may not have a lot of luck getting the United States back in. Story 33. I believe people need to hope Congress takes action to stop the ineffective president. He is unlikely to back down regardless of the situation. Supporters have convinced themselves this is a negotiation tactic, but I think the president simply enjoys the concept of tariffs. Story 34. The rest of the world will trade among themselves. We will no longer be allowed in the playground, similar to Russia and North Korea. Story 35. Someone could run for president solely on the platform of reversing all of Trump's ego-fueled actions and would win in a landslide. Vote for me. Story 36. Someone needs to inform Trump about the consequences if China decides that trade with the United States is not beneficial. The worst-case scenario is that they sell off their dollar reserves, and the rest of the BRICS countries follow suit. Trump is taking risks without having the necessary leverage. Story 37. The size of the United States economy will shrink, and the longer this situation persists, the more likely that contraction will become essentially permanent. There is a possibility that the trade conflict could escalate into actual war eventually. The United States will survive, but it is likely that it will never fully recover for at least a generation. Much of the reason the United States became the wealthiest nation in the world was due to the post-World War II global order and the exertion of American soft power and cultural exports. The former president wants to dismantle all of that in favor of something resembling 19th century mercantilism and protectionism. This plan contradicts the entire premise of the United States' global dominance and makes sense only if his goal is to undermine the nation. Story 38. My guess is it will go one more round, and China will decide that they would rather not do business with the United States and will enact an embargo. At that point, everyone else in the world will have the opportunity to buy their goods at rock-bottom prices from China. If this happens, I would not be surprised to see other countries follow suit. We need them far more than they need us. Story 39. It's a competition at this point. I don't think this is going to play out the way Donald Trump wants it to. Someone needs to give him a reality check. Story 40. I believe the situation will worsen before it improves. Once consumers in the United States begin to feel the impact, Republicans in Congress will suddenly take action and start restricting the executive branch's power to impose tariffs without congressional approval. Their motivation will only arise when they fear losing the midterm elections. Story 41. This was never about tariffs. It has always been about Trump wanting other leaders, companies, and manufacturers to make deals with him, meaning they do something that benefits him directly. It is about power and control. Story 42. Americans will face significant challenges. China still has the entire world to trade with, while the United States has damaged its relationships. Story 43. I feel that Trump will impose more tariffs, and China will respond with tariffs of their own. This will be expensive for us. China is not concerned, as it does not affect them significantly, and they are unlikely to back down because they know Trump will be gone in 3.5 years. Once a new administration comes in, they will negotiate or remove tariffs together, since Trump claimed these tariffs are permanent. Story 44. The aftermath of this event, if Trump backs down from tariffs, is that the rest of the world will see the United States as an unreliable trading partner. This will further push countries towards becoming close trading allies with China and hasten the point where China becomes the global superpower. Story 45. America will become isolated. Americans will face poverty and desperation for food. The disadvantaged will be exploited for cheap labor. Factories will produce low-quality imitations of Chinese goods, contributing to pollution that obscures sunlight. Automation will increase significantly. It is urgent to implement fair taxation on the wealthy. Story 46. China is fighting a trade war on one front, while we are fighting on 184 fronts. If everyone decides to follow China's lead, we will be in trouble. Others will continue to trade among themselves, leaving us out of the equation. Story 47. If we are lucky, a severe recession may occur. If not, the United States bond market may implode and take the entire global economy with it. This all assumes the Republican Party lacks the strength to stop this, which, to be clear, they can do at any time. Story 48. Doesn't this hurt the United States more than it hurts China? I'm pretty sure the United States buys more from China than China does from the United States. I wonder if this will cause surplus stock, leading other countries to receive goods at even cheaper prices at this point. Story 49. Every small farm in the United States that relies on exporting to China, particularly corn, rice, soybeans, and pork, faces the risk of folding and being purchased by large corporations. Many will struggle to survive as the United States increases tariffs, making it difficult for them to afford agricultural materials, which will likely be acquired by larger companies. Small farms operate on thin margins, cannot always compete on price domestically, and depend on selling either overseas or receiving support from U.S. agricultural subsidy programs, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. These subsidies are being reduced, and with more stringent requirements for Small Business Administration loans, there is no safety net for these farms. Large corporations can withstand a poor sales season, as they have access to rainy day funds that allow them to undercut family farms that cannot endure such pressure. Additionally, there is insufficient demand within the United States to consume all the food produced, and products from small farms are generally more expensive. Small farms can attempt to market themselves as boutique food providers, but this approach is risky, especially when consumers are facing financial constraints. Most families are likely to choose a 75% higher-priced item over a more costly option. This trade war, similar to the previous one, is unlikely to benefit farmers. In fact, it is poised to be worse. China has already shifted some of its purchasing to India and Russia, which may lead to a complete withdrawal from the U.S. market, leaving no other buyers interested in American products. Story 50. The next administration is going to make significant efforts to eliminate these tariffs. Trump negatively impacted America for the next 50 to 100 years. Story 51. It is called the Great Depression. I hope you are all researching how to survive it. It is coming, and it is all the Red Hat Group's fault. I will make sure to remind them of that fact as often as I can. Story 52. 10,000 new factories will emerge, fully operational in the United States, and all citizens will gladly accept $18 per hour line worker jobs due to their untaxed overtime opportunities. Story 53. The United States and China have essentially embargoed each other. Trade is going to be severely affected. The United States will likely have to make concessions first, because China can still export to other countries and can afford to endure the situation. The United States cannot easily replace China's role in trade. Story 54. Shoplifting is expected to increase significantly in the United States. This will result in every store locking up products behind plexiglass doors. Customers may have to wait an hour just to buy a single stick of deodorant as lines build up with frustrated shoppers, many of whom supported these changes. Story 55. China will win the contest, and Trump will claim victory after negotiating a deal similar to the one they already had. His supporters will cheer. Story 56. Does China buy products manufactured in the United States? This will undoubtedly have a significant impact on agricultural products, but I am not sure it influences much else. Story 57. The United States is more dependent on Chinese goods to sustain its retail sector than China is on the United States to sell those goods. China is not engaged in a trade war with any other country and can find alternative markets. The United States is in a trade war with almost every country except Russia, and Russia's manufacturing sector is currently occupied, making it difficult to find a low-cost labor force. You do not need to be an economist to understand this situation. Story 58. China holds the cards. If they choose to, they can call on the United States debt they own. If the United States were to default on that, the country would economically collapse in ways we cannot imagine. Story 59. Nobody knows. Genuinely. Not even Trump. He is too demented and senile to know what he will do 10 hours from now when his dementia kicks in after sundown. Story 60. China and the rest of the world are benefiting. Trade deals are being made between countries that very few thought would happen. The United States is achieving its goal of becoming self-sustainable. Unfortunately, the current administration overlooked the need to gradually transition to self-sustainability and settled for a less effective approach. Story 61. Trump will pretend to perform well while continuing to disregard the American people. Story 62. I have been reading about the causes of and experiences during famine lately. I didn't start out feeling prepared, but it now seems more like preparation. Story 63. If you want to know, just check to see what Trump's hero did in Germany around 90 years ago. He is following his hero closely. There is also an outline called Project 2025. Story 64. Can someone explain if there is any benefit to come out of this for other nations, not China and the United States? I am not an economist, but the significant increases would push suppliers to explore other options. Wouldn't it? Thank you. Story 65. At some point, we are effectively sanctioning each other. The truth is goods could be manufactured all over the world or even domestically for not much more. However, the problem is that none of the factories are built, and that won't happen overnight. I suspect all the companies will wait it out until a new administration comes in or until Congress steps up and removes tariff power from the executive branch. Look around your house and see how many items were made in China. What happens when every one of those items costs 150% more than it did before? People will get very upset when they are personally affected by this. When their retirement accounts are losing another 20%, when their grocery bills double almost overnight, Congress will have no choice but to take action. It is likely that these tariffs will be removed before the end of the year, effectively silencing him. Story 66. Trade between the United States and China stalls. China becomes more powerful as it continues to trade with its other partners tariff-free. The United States fades into obscurity as no one can buy anything from Temu, let alone any physical retail store. Story 67. I believe China sells U.S. treasuries to punish the United States, increase interest rates, and generate a stagflation cycle. Story 68. This is the watershed moment people will recognize as the time the United States ceded superpower status to China. Story 69. The individual in question believes that factories and infrastructure will suddenly appear in the United States to address the economic challenges. It is not the 1970s. Many factories are abandoned and in disrepair. It would take 8 to 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild them. They may just wait 4 years until he is no longer in office and a more competent leader is in charge. I believe this will harm our economy for the next decade. which is unwise. Story 70. Things will become very expensive for Americans. China is likely already halfway through completing factories that will produce the items they currently import from the United States. Story 71. Trump will go to extremes. China will simply state that trade is over until Trump matures. Americans will suffer and then turn against Trump, as he still hasn't provided any justification for this. Story 72. Trump has a close relationship with Putin. I don't know what else he needs to do to prove it to people. He seems to have little regard for America. Story 73. The objective is to diminish the value of everything so that the wealthy can possess everything. Trump will attempt to remain in power indefinitely. Story 74. I work in an industry focused on manufacturing and importing. If I took a drink every time someone mentioned the word tariff at work, I would be intoxicated by 8:30 and incapacitated by noon. I will skip the logic and reasoning behind my feelings on this matter, as there is a lot involved. This situation culminates with the United States retreating and seeking re-entry into the global trade economy. Anyone who believes we can start manufacturing everything we currently import in the United States does not understand manufacturing, importing, sourcing raw materials, or global trade. Story 75. Not a good outcome for anyone. Our retirement savings are severely affected. Our inexpensive items come from China. The previous administration showed little regard for the United States. Their only interest was profit for themselves. I hope those who supported them face the consequences. They got what they wanted, now enjoy your life without complaints. His cabinet members are out of touch. As for Stephen Miller, his actions have been despicable. Story 76. Trump and his friends buy a lot of stocks. Trump announces that the trade war has been won. Tariffs are removed. Trump and his friends profit immensely. Story 77. This will exclude the United States from the global economy and encourage countries to use an alternative currency for international trade. Story 78. Trump declares infinity tariffs. See, I can do this all day. Want some more? Super extra infinity tariffs on your ancestors. Story 79. I think that the rest of the world stops caring about the United States and moves on to improving things without us. The United States loses nearly all the power it has had internationally and becomes a less prominent nation. Story 80. We pay significantly until these children learn how to get along and the bully in our White House learns to cooperate with others. Story 81. China won't back down, and nor should it. I wish the European Union had the same courage. The United States needs to be told where to go. There is no room for bullies on the world stage. You play nice with others, or you sit on the naughty step with all the other troublemakers. Story 82. China has announced an 84% retaliatory tariff on United States goods. What happens next? How do you think this will unfold? I don't believe this will end well for the United States. Former President Trump has made enemies around the world. They will likely trade among themselves and leave the United States out in the cold. Story 83. Time for Congress to exert its power and put an end to this. The executive branch does not have the authority to impose tariffs unilaterally according to the Constitution. It is time to contact all of your federal representatives. Story 84. More importantly, they have placed restrictions on who can buy rare earth minerals and have substantial control over the world's supply of these resources. It will significantly harm the U.S. technology industry if they stop selling to the United States. There is no way Trump will benefit from this behavior. Story 85. At some point, doesn't the tariff negate any trade? If you can't really sell a good with a 50% tariff, doesn't a 100% tariff mean very little? Story 86. I don't know, but nothing good. What I do know is that the last place I would ever go for answers to this is AskReddit. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.